All right, class, I will be reading chapter 5 for you out of Frederick Douglass. As to my own treatment while I lived on Colonel Lloyd's plantation, it was very similar to that of the other slave children. I was not old enough to work in the field, and there being little else than field work to do, I had a great deal of leisure time. Leisure just means like downtime. You can do what you want during your leisure time. The most I had to do was to drive up the cows at evening, keep the fowls or birds out of the garden, keep the front yard clean, and run of errands for my old master's daughter, Mrs. Lucretia Old. The most of my leisure time I spent in helping Master Daniel Lloyd in finding his birds after he had shot them. So he's hunting, helping the guy with hunting, the way you might have like a bird dog go find the birds when you're hunting. My connection with Master Daniel was of some advantage to me. He became quite attached to me and was a sort of protector of me. He would not allow the older boys to impose upon me and would divide his cakes with me. I was seldom or rarely whipped by my old master and suffered little from anything else than hunger and cold. I suffered much from hunger, but much more from cold. In hottest summer and coldest winter, I was kept almost naked. No shoes, no stockings, no jacket, no trousers, nothing on but a coarse towel linen shirt reaching only to my knees. I had no bed. I must have perished with cold, but that on the coldest nights I used to steal a bag which was used for carrying corn to the mill. I would crawl into this bag and there sleep on the cold, damp clay floor with my head in and my feet out. My feet have been so cracked with the frost that the pen with which I am writing might be laid in the gashes. So the only thing that helped him survive was stealing this bag, but because his feet weren't protected by it, he would get these huge, awful cracks in them, big enough for a pen to fit into. We were not regularly allowanced. Remember, this isn't getting money like allowance. This is getting their food and their clothes. So they don't regularly get their food and clothing. Our food was coarse cornmeal boiled. This was called mush. It was put into a large wooden tray or trough and set down upon the ground. The children were then called like so many pigs, and like so many pigs, they would come and devour the mush, some with oyster shells, others with pieces of shingle, some with naked hands, and none with spoons. He that ate fastest got most. He that was strongest secured the best place, and few left the trough satisfied. So we talked before about the dehumanization of the slaves, of that being a theme that we see in these slave narratives, and that's what we're seeing right now, treated like animals. To be dehumanized is to be lowered to the level of an animal. I was probably between 7 and 8 years old when I left Colonel Lloyd's plantation, and I left it with joy. I shall never forget the ecstasy with which I received the intelligence that my old master, Anthony, had determined to let me go to Baltimore to live with Mr. Hugh Auld, brother to my old master's son-in-law, Captain Thomas Auld. I received this information about 3 days before my departure. They were 3 of the happiest days I ever enjoyed. I spent the most part of these 3 days in the creek, washing off the plantation skirt and preparing myself for my departure. So think about, why might he be so excited to leave? He finds out 3 days before he leaves, and he's very, very happy. The pride of appearance, which this would indicate, was not my own. I spent the time in washing, not so much because I wished to, but because Mrs. Lucretia had told me I must get all the dead skin off my feet and knees before I could go to Baltimore. For the people in Baltimore were very cleanly and would laugh at me if I looked dirty. Besides, she was going to give me a pair of trousers, or pants, which I should not put on unless I got all the dirt off of me. The thought of owning a pair of trousers was great indeed. It was almost a sufficient motive, not only to make me take off what would be called my pig drovers, the mange, but the skin itself. I went in at good earnest, working for the first time with the hope of reward. So he's scrubbing so hard, trying to get himself clean because he's so excited to actually get to wear pants for the first time. The ties that ordinarily bind children to their homes were all suspended in my case. I found no severe trial in my departure. My home was charmless. It was not home to me. On parting from it, I could not feel that I was leaving anything which I could have enjoyed by staying. My mother was dead. My grandmother lived far off, so that I seldom saw her. I had 2 sisters and 1 brother that lived in the same house with me, but the early separation of us from our mother had well nigh blotted the fact of our relationship from our memories. So he has nothing to be sad about leaving. Mom's dead, grandmother he rarely sees. He barely knows his siblings. So there's no reason to be sad. I looked for home elsewhere and was confident of finding none which I should relish less than the one which I was leaving. If, however, I found in my new home hardship, hunger, whipping, and nakedness, I had the consolation that I should not have escaped any one of them by staying. So even if it's bad where I'm going, it's bad right now. Having already had more than a taste of them in the house of my old master, and having endured them there, I have very naturally inferred my ability to endure them elsewhere, and especially at Baltimore. For I had something of the feeling about Baltimore that it expressed in the proverb that being hanged in England is preferable to dying a natural death in Ireland. And that's referring to this long-standing hatred between the English and the Irish. That for hundreds of years, there's this big history there. So might as well suffer in a better place like Baltimore than in a terrible place on the plantation. I had the strongest desire to see Baltimore. Cousin Tom, though not fluent in speech, had inspired me with that desire by his eloquent description of the place. I could never point out anything of the great house, no matter how beautiful or powerful, but that he had seen something at Baltimore far exceeding, both in beauty and strength, the object which I pointed out to him. So Cousin Tom always says that anything Frederick Douglass points to in at the Great House Farm as being like good or cool, Cousin Tom says, oh, but it's way better in Baltimore. Just wait till you ever get to see Baltimore. Even the great house itself, with all its pictures, was far inferior to the many buildings in Baltimore. So strong was my desire that I thought a gratification of it would fully compensate for whatever loss of comforts I should sustain by the exchange. I left without a regret and with the highest hope of future happiness. So he's feeling really good when he leaves for Baltimore. We sailed out of Miles River for Baltimore on a Saturday morning. I remember only the day of the week, for at that time I had no knowledge of the days of the month nor the months of the year. On setting sail, I walked aft or to the front of the ship and gave to Colonel Lloyd's plantation what I hoped would be the last look. Excuse me, aft would be the back of the ship. I then placed myself in the bows of the sloop and there spent the remainder of the day in looking ahead, interesting myself in what was in the distance rather than in the things near or behind. In the afternoon of that day, we reached Annapolis, the capital of the state. We stopped but a few moments so that I had time to go on shore. It was the first large town that I had ever seen, and though it would look small compared with some of our New England factory villages, I thought it a wonderful place for its size, more imposing even than the Great House Farm. We arrived at Baltimore early on Sunday morning, landing at Smith's Wharf, not far from Bowley's Wharf. We had on board the sloop a large flock of sheep, and after aiding and driving them to the slaughterhouse of Mr. Curtis on London Slater's Hill, I was conducted by Rich, one of the hands belonging on board of the sloop, to my new home in Alekiana Street, near Mr. Gardner's shipyard on Fells Point. Mr. and Mrs. Old were both at home and met me at the door with their little son Thomas, to take care of whom I had been given. So his job is to take care of Thomas, the child. And here I saw what I had never seen before. It was a white face beaming with the most kindly emotions. It was the face of my new mistress, Sophia Old. So to beam is to like smile with happiness, and he's never seen this before from a white person. I wish I could describe the rapture that flashed through my soul as I beheld it. It was a new and strange sight to me, brightening up my pathway with the light of happiness. Little Thomas was told there was his Freddie, and I was to take care of little Thomas, and thus I entered upon the duties of my new home with the most cheering prospect ahead. So Frederick Douglass is referred to as Freddie here, and that's what little Thomas is going to call him. I looked upon my departure from Colonel Lloyd's plantation as one of the most interesting events of my life. It is possible, and even quite probable, that but for the mere circumstance of being removed from that plantation to Baltimore, I should have today, instead of being here seated by my own table in the enjoyment of freedom and the happiness of home, writing this narrative, been confined in the galling chains of slavery. Going to live in Baltimore laid the foundation and opened the gateway to all my subsequent prosperity. So he's saying there, if he did not go to Baltimore, he would not be free today. He would not be writing this narrative. This is a very important turning point in his life when he looks back on his life. I have ever regarded it as the first plain manifestation or appearance of that kind providence which has ever since attended me and marked my life with so many favors. I regarded the selection of myself as being somewhat remarkable. There were a number of slave children that might have been sent from the plantation to Baltimore. There were those younger, those older, and those of the same age. I was chosen from among them all and was the first, last, and only chosen. So it could have been anyone who was chosen to go to Baltimore. There were a lot of other people, but Frederick Douglass says for some reason he was selected, and that has forever changed his life. I may be deemed superstitious and even egotistical in regarding this event as a special interposition of divine providence in my favor. Whenever you see divine providence and the P is capitalized, that's referring to God. Okay, God stepping in. Divine providence is God stepping in to do something good for you. But I should be false to the earliest sentiments of my soul if I suppress the opinion. I prefer to be true to myself, even at the hazard of incurring the ridicule of others, rather than to be false and incur my own abhorrence. So I would rather tell the truth about what I feel than and have other people ridicule me or mock me than to not tell the truth and then not be able to live with myself. That's what Frederick Douglass is saying there. From my earliest recollection, I date the entertainment of a deep conviction that slavery would not always be able to hold me within its foul embrace. And in the darkest hours of my career in slavery, this living word of faith and spirit of hope departed not from me, but remained like ministering angels to cheer me through the gloom. This good spirit was from God, and to him I offer thanksgiving and praise. So here we're seeing his belief in God. We're going to start seeing like references to Christianity here. He believes that there's something better for him, that he is destined to escape slavery, and he starts to sense that at this point in his life. So that's the chapter. We have Frederick Douglass arriving in Baltimore. So that is chapter 5.